We have a long way to go. It's only February, but the West Virginia Mountaineers 2025 schedule, their full schedule was released recently. So we are now going to go through it and dissect it with the team presently constructed and kind of give our feel, our outlook, and maybe predictions for the upcoming season. If everyone else is doing a way too early projection, why not us? So again, it's very, very early. We'll probably do this again, if not do this a couple times. But we are going to dissect the Mountaineers 2025 schedule. We knew the out-of-conference schedule, or at least everyone should have known the out-of-conference schedule for a while now, but the Big 12 released the full conference schedule, and we now know what Rich Rodriguez's first year back for his second tenure as head coach of the Mountaineers will look like. Mike Asti here, WVU Sports Now, Mountaineer Report, joined as always by Cody Nespor. So, Cody, we're going to play a game here. We did this last year. We did this with the basketball and the football schedule. It went over well. Some fans joined in, so we're going to try to do it here. And again, this is very, very early, so we really don't even have a starting quarterback name, so it's kind of hard to do this, but we're going to do this nonetheless. And we're going to say, going into the matchup, if we think West Virginia will be the favorite, the underdog, or we could call it a swing game. So Vegas may give them a game and a half line as a favorite or an underdog, but we could call it a swing game if you'd like. There's no rules there on whether it's 1.5, 3.5, 4.5, any of that. If you want to call it a swing game, you can. But we're going to go through it and do favorite, underdog, or swing game. And going into this last year, I will let you know if you happen to have missed that show. We had a lot of swing games on that preview show, even though I did think they'd have a little better of a year than they had. And obviously that led us here because that year did not go well enough. Neil Brown's 6-year tenure ended, and now Rich Rodriguez back with the Mountaineers. So week one, unlike Neil Brown's tenure, Cody, and we both know this is the one thing I think gets in his craw that he may forever be bitter about, that Neil Brown had a myriad of years going on the road against the Power Four. Even his last year when it was a home game, it was against the Power Four, Penn State, who went pretty deep in the college football playoff. And the only FCS he had in week one to open up a season was JMU, who now is an FBS program. Not the case for year one for Rich Rodriguez, though. Doesn't have to worry about any of that in terms of a gauntlet. Rich Rodriguez will open up week one, first game back, first game coaching the Mountaineers since 2007 against a Pittsburgh school, but not that Pittsburgh school. We'll get to them in a moment. And it will be Robert Morris coming to Morgantown on August 30th. I think it's safe to say we both have them as a favorite going into this game, or else, boy, the offseason went poorly.
Yeah. And RMU's competed in their conference the last couple seasons. Yeah. That they're, that's a win by 40 kind of game though. That's it's the FCS game, you win it no matter what.
Yeah, I mean Neil Brown even won those big. Even for whatever people think of that tenure, Neil Brown even won those big. Yeah, I mean there were moments that, okay, the Duquesne game, we had a weather delay, and that was rough for a quarter or so, and LIU ran a kickback. But other than, I mean there's been some asinine moments, but at the end of the day, you do win big. You do usually win by 30, and it'll really be interesting if Rich Rod, I'd imagine, Cody, that's a game he's going to want to send a message. I'm not saying he's going to play everybody all 4 quarters if it's going to get them hurt. And, if he has the game in hand, I'm sure he's going to start resting guys like you do in the FCS. But you're shaking kinks off. But I think he's going to want to let his offense loose a little bit, let the players have some fun, let the fans enjoy a big win, and to be 1-0 for the first time since 2019. I do think that's a stat that I think you would agree with me on this part too. It's going to be annoying. We're all going to have to write about it. It's going to be a conversation that'll be the first 1-0 start to a season for the Mountaineers in 2019, and the first time they went 5 years without one in however many decades, etc. It's a little unfair if you look at the week one schedules, but that will be brought up. Do you have an over-under on over-under
No.
35? You just mentioned 40.
Yeah, I mean, probably 5 touchdowns.
I said
I don't
35,
know.
not 30. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Robert Morris, like I said, they've been decent in their league. So maybe I would say 28 and a half, 4 touchdowns.
Yeah.
But so you say I did look at 2020 they opened against Eastern Kentucky.
Okay.
Obviously that was the COVID year though.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was because I was thinking in my head that maybe 2022. But yeah, I don't know. Yeah, like I said, 4 touchdowns against Robert Morris, I think would be a good start to the year.
Yeah, I'd say, to say the least, that would be a really, really solid start to the year. And it'll be interesting if they get a player from that game. They end up plucking and adding him to the roster the next year, because that did happen with Aiden Gardens and Duquesne. If you can impress, and yeah, it's the FCS game. You got to win it big, but we'll see what happens. They're also going to be getting into a game and learning things for the first time with that staff and those players. So maybe it'll take some shaking some rust off. This is then a debatable game. I feel like this has been known for a while, but I did see after the full schedule was released, a lot of fans were upset about this. This is a little bit of a debate. We talk about schedules all the time and are still going to moving forward. West Virginia has to travel to a group of 5 in Ohio, and that's an Ohio program. You mentioned Robert Morris at their level. Ohio has obviously been good at their level recently. Granted, they're going through their own change of the guard as well, but that's on September 6th. West Virginia, for me, I'll jump into it here. Obviously, they should be the favorite in that game, and they should win that game. You could argue it's kind of a trap because Ohio isn't necessarily bad, and they are at home. But the next year and into the series, they're going to have home games against Ohio. It would have been all home games out of conference if they would have had that at home. So you could do whatever you want, but that just would have looked ridiculous. I do get the annoyance of traveling to a group of 5, but other programs have done it. As long as you have 10 power 4s, which they'll have this year, and they did not have in recent seasons under Neil Brown, then I think it's an okay schedule. But I'd imagine you as your favorite as well on that one.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I really like the road group of 5 games. I think they're a lot of fun. There's always a handful every season.
Yeah.
I always, it always makes a good environment. It's really, really fun for the group of 5 team. And like you said, this could maybe be a trap game. Ohio's got a new coach. Their fan base is going to be excited. They're coming off some success. You get a Power 5 at home. Like there's some things going for the Bobcats, but again, like you got to beat a MAC school, or else you're not gonna. It's not a serious year. So yeah, favorite. That's another one. Like you should probably win that by 3 touchdowns, and it shouldn't have any drama late.
That's how it should go. And you lose, even if you're on the road, you lose to a MAC school before the Backyard Brawl. Obviously, the Backyard Brawl is going to have tons of hype nonetheless, but that's really going to pop a balloon right before you then would have Pitt coming into town. And yeah, it's obviously a must win. Every game really is, but you can't lose week 1 and week 2 for sure when these are the opponents. And yeah, I mean, you always do try to look at the little guy and how it's great for them. I can see this being an annoyance for a Power 4 program, and I would say that if you were doing the 11 Power 4 thing, that would even be worse than this. You have 10 Power 4s on the schedule, and yes, one the one out of conference game, you're going on the road to a group of 5 that's a good program, but maybe you're also getting lucky. You mentioned their coaching change. If you were playing them last year in this situation, it probably would be a different story. That's the best season they've had, in a long time. This, maybe they have to get their footing as well. Maybe they are going to experience a dip as well. They had to change their roster as well. So maybe you're catching them on a better opportunity than it would have been a year ago, even though you're going through your own transition, and you just got to freaking win. But we have seen this. I mean, we have seen group of 5s win on the road, or certainly win when a Power 4 is coming to their place. Pitt, for example, in that ACC title year with Kenny Pickett, they actually lost to a group of 5, which is why they were never even in the playoff conversation despite winning a conference title that year. And that kind of was a stain of that year. You have the ability to rejuvenate the seasons now with the 12-team playoff. It's not like the year would be over, but that would just ruin the vibes. I mean, we've talked so much in the past years on how things can ruin vibes. That would just crush the vibes to go down. So that's where they're favored there. Now, here is where we actually can have a conversation. Week 3, you host Pitt. It is the backyard brawl. It is trying to get revenge off last year, even though this is a new team and a new staff. This also will end the current series, and a West Virginia win would tie up the current series 2 apiece, and then you take a few years off before you play again. A loss would give Pitt a lot of bragging rights and 3 wins out of the 4 games, and the only loss, we were there, Joe Jerkovic basically handed the game away, so Pitt could certainly say that they were the better team with the exception of Jerkovic in all the seasons. Even when they were 3-9, they could blame it on Phil, but otherwise they would have 3 wins to the 4. And it's Rich Rodriguez's first game against Pitt since we all know what happened in the last one. And that led to his departure. Not that it was the reason, but it preceded the departure. And here we are. Don't have to go into it. We all know. They're at home. Pitt is a program that they're staying the course. Their offseason is not nearly as active. As West Virginia is at all, but there's a lot of pressure there. If they have another rough season, and they did lose a lot of games at the end of their season, losing 6 in a row after starting out 7-0, maybe Narduzzi is going to be fired, and they're going to be going through their own transition. West Virginia being at home, for me, they're going to be favored in this game, but it is the backyard brawl, so I'm going to label this for me a swing game. I could see this going either way, even though you're at home. But West Virginia should win this. Without knowing these rosters and these players and seeing them in spring, I do think West Virginia is a little bit of a better team and a better roster, even though we don't know who's at quarterback. I'm assuming it's going to be Jalen Henderson. Eli Horton had a great time, but I'm going to go swing. You just never know with the brawl, and Rich Rod knows that better than anybody.
Yeah, I would lean towards Pitt. And to be favored, it's so early in the season. I would give it to Pitt just because of the stability. Obviously, Narduzzi's been there for a long time now. Their coaching staff. Obviously, they were breaking into the new guy, Cade Bell, last year.
Yeah, this
will be his second year with the system. Eli Holstein's back after his great year. That little running back is back. So it's if this was game 9. I'd probably say swing. It being game 3, I think is a big detriment to West Virginia, and they're not really going to be tested before this. So I would lean Pitt.
I mean, Pitt won't be tested before this either. Likely, both teams will go in there with a couple wins, and we'll see what happens. And obviously, this will go into West Virginia's conference schedule. And Neil Brown has been honest by saying that he felt that once they lost the brawl, that there was no saving the season in terms of the vibes, even though the coaches were trying to do their work. So you do wonder if West Virginia loses this game, what the vibes are like going into Kansas, going into the Big 12 schedule. Obviously, this is different than 2007. They're not in the same conference. If West Virginia wins the Big 12, they're in the playoff. They could lose to Pitt by 40 points. 13-9 is an impossibility between these two teams in this current format. But I put out a poll last year on would you rather win the Big 12 and lose to the rivals at the time they also played Penn State, or win those games and just be an average program and end up 6-6 and putter away, the Big 12. And it was not unanimous. I mean, I know the program, they even let me know that obviously they would rather have a Big 12 title. And, that's definitely the case. It's pretty obvious, but if I remember correctly, there was like 37% of the fans that literally would rather be Pitt and not care about the conference at all. And obviously that's part of the whole thing, that there are a lot of fans that still don't even want to be in the Big 12, but that's where they got to be. But with that high of a number, they lose this, you're going to have problems vibe-wise. It's year 1, it's not year 6, so I don't know if they're called for Rich Rod to be fired, but because you are talking about continuity versus a new thing, but still, you're at home. It's on September 13th. This isn't on September 14th or September 15th. Recent games have been off that date. You're right there. Luckily for him, it's not in Pittsburgh. He's not going to have to see signs, etc. They will just be from road fans if they let him in with those signs. But he'll have that love. But I'm borderline ready to call that a must-win vibe-wise, at least. But I'm going to say it's swing because they're at home. If this was in Pittsburgh, if this was at Acrisure, then I would definitely favor Pitt.
Yeah,
I also
100%.
don't think Pitt. I also don't expect much more than what we just saw from Pitt. Now, granted, West Virginia was still worse and lost the game, but Pitt was 7-0 and played no ranked teams. Once they started playing good teams, whether Eli's hurt or not, I know they had other issues with injuries, they started losing games. So I think Pitt, again, is probably an average bowl team, 6-7 wins at best. And that's probably what West Virginia is. So this is probably a toss-up game again. I mean, Cody, if you look at the end of the season, Pitt was 7-0, got ranked, West Virginia fired a coach. At the end of the year, they were different by one game, and every single analytic, whether you want to go to ESPN's Power Rankings, their Football Index, or even the Wolf Rankings that have been doing it for 50-plus years and gave Oregon the crown, even though they didn't win the CFP, they had Pitt and West Virginia right there. And Pitt was one spot ahead because they won head-to-head. It's the only difference. So we'll see. That maybe could be the thing again. So you do actually have West Virginia as the underdog in that game. I have that being a swing. They both have the first two games, obviously, with the Mountaineers favored. WVU then travels to Kansas on September 20th to kick off Big 12 play. We've seen Kansas be a problem before. Daniels is still freaking there. So they do have continuity, even though he had a really rough year last year. That's on the road. And West Virginia was able to come back and beat him this past season, as Kansas endured even a worse season, even though they had expectations and they were in a lot of games, maybe more so than the Mountaineers. I'm going to say, regardless of the Pitt game, they're probably an underdog in that one, going in at least. But they could win it. It's a winnable game, but they're an underdog.
Yeah, I agree. Kansas has got to get their offense fixed. Obviously, that was a big mess last year, and they lost. Kotelnicki to Penn State. But Jalen Daniels is an extremely good quarterback. They get their offense fixed. They're probably going to be pretty good in the Big 12.
Yeah.
West Virginia, kind of skinned by in the game last year. So yeah, I would give that one to Kansas too. In even more so than we've been talking about in basketball. Road Big 12 football games they're tough. Every single one is always tough.
Yeah, we're gonna hear that from fans. Road Big 12, it's gonna be tough. And I also think, kind of in the reverse of what I was saying with the Brawl, if that game was in Morgantown, I maybe would favor West Virginia. But that being on the road, off of how close it was last year, even though these are different teams, they do have continuity where West Virginia is all new, certainly at the important spots. And what they need to fix offensively, they were scoring. They were right up there in analytic rankings. Daniels just needs to take better care of the freaking football. I mean, he just needs to take better care of the football. He threw 6 interceptions the first handful of games. I believe he had 8 by the time they played West Virginia in the middle of the season. I don't remember exactly where he finished, but that's way too many. Right there, you're done. You shouldn't be throwing any more picks. So if that continues on, then who knows? And West Virginia's secondary, you got to figure it'll be better, because it couldn't be any freaking worse than it was last year. If it's any worse, then they're losing all these games. You got to figure it's a little bit better. So we both have them as underdog there, though. Then they get to host Utah on September 27th. They avoided Utah last year, and many people think Utah could become the top program of this new Big 12. Didn't happen last year. They had a really rough year below expectations, but they also are expecting to be back, even though maybe some changes are happening there on their team, although staff-wise, they have more continuity than any other program in the country. I mean, they've been going on for 2 decades, for crying out loud. Their head coach replaced Urban Meyer back 20 years ago when he was there, before he went to Florida. That's how long it's been. They are at home, but if we expect more from Utah this year, dare I say I'm on the verge of West Virginia being either an underdog or that being a swing game. Because West Virginia is at home, I'm going to go swing.
Yeah, I'd give that a push too, because, like you mentioned, Utah's The last 2 years are aberrations because they've had quarterback problems.
Right.
Utah is an extremely consistent program with having good football.
Yep.
And you think like every team in the country is a quarterback away, right? But you think Utah's just they get their quarterback issues fixed. 2 years ago they played like 7 guys. Every team's going to be bad when they do that.
Yeah.
So it's
Cam Rising
you
got hurt
know
last year. Yeah.
yeah, and that's he's been hurt so much lately.
Yeah. Yeah.
If they can find a quarterback, they're going to be pretty good in the Big 12. That's just that's that program that they were extremely consistent in the Pac-12. I would give that a push. It's so there's so many Big 12 teams, and probably because of transfer portal, like teams across the country now, where it's like there's so many ifs now. Like, well, if this happens, they'll be pretty good, or if
Yeah.
that. But
Yeah.
and Utah might be the biggest one on the schedule just because of the quarterback stuff the last 2 years.
Yeah, and this is also kind of a benchmark spot on the schedule because if West Virginia wins the Brawl, that would allow them, at least nationally, to have a little bit of a cushion going into these conference games, even though obviously the conference play is the most important and you got to win those. You can't drop the conference games. But if they win the Brawl, and certainly if they win at Kansas, and then they win this game, the one thing Neil Brown certainly didn't accomplish that was different than every past era of West Virginia football, basically past half century plus. What Neil Brown, he got ranked in the coaches poll at the end of 2023, but he never got ranked in the Associated Press poll all the way through. Dana Holgerson, Don Nealon, Rich Rod, they're getting ranked. No matter what you think of different years, they're getting ranked at some point. You now are winning these swing games, and maybe even if they still drop to Utah, assuming Utah will be a good team. But if they win the Brawl, if they win at Kansas, and then if they play close with Utah, certainly if they beat them, this is probably the spot where the Associated Press may rank them for the first time in 6-7 years. They didn't get it in the Neil Brown era, and then Rich Rod could come in middle of the season, year one, and get an AP rank. It doesn't matter whether it's 25, 22, 15. That would be a gigantic deal just because it did not happen under Neil Brown. And yeah, they got in the coaches poll as their staff keeps trying to bang the drum on when anyone says they weren't ranked, but that's not the AP poll. And you could argue it doesn't even matter anymore with the CFP standings and that being more important. But still, I could argue the AP poll, and I've done a whole rant on this. I don't think the AP poll should be ranking anybody until about week 8. And arguably, it could just go away. You could argue it going away. There's no point of it, really. But if you care about it, that could be the point where maybe they do get that AP rank. Cody Nespor, Mike Asti here, WVU Sports Now. We are going through the Mountaineers' schedule here, whether they are going to be the favorite, the underdog, or saying it's a swing game. Very, very early. We're recording this on February 6th, so we don't even have a starting quarterback named. These teams as well are going through their own transitions into the spring and some uncertainty on their rosters. It's hard to do this. We're going to have to do this again, but just to have some fun. Then you have week 6, West Virginia at BYU on October 3rd. Avoided them last year when BYU became a dominant program in the conference that was a real contender after the year before when BYU was really rough and West Virginia was able to beat up on them. So it's hard to say what BYU you're going to get. Historically, BYU's had some really big years, but they've also had some really bad seasons. They do have a solid coaching staff in place. You figure they're mostly going to be good, and they have most of that back and should be a contender. This on the road. So you host Utah, but then you go to BYU, and that is a rough place to play. I got to say they're an underdog going on the road.
Yeah, I think that this is the biggest underdog game so far. It's also on a Friday, which means it'll be a primetime game.
100%. Yep.
So, it's going to be, they have a huge fan base. It'll be a huge crowd out there. Obviously, it's I think the longest travel of the season. And BYU's going to be good. Like they kind of maybe should have made the playoff this year if the Big 12 tiebreakers were different and
yeah.
But like you said, they were one of the best teams in the league last year. They have a ton of returners. They should be good again. It's a tough road trip on a Friday. West Virginia's going to be a massive underdog.
Do you think the spread is better or worse for the Mountaineers than 7.5? Meaning, is BYU favored by 7.5 or more, or is it under that?
I could see it being them favored by multiple scores.
Okay.
9.5 or
Yeah.
something like that.
10.5 even. Yeah.
Yeah. Are they going to be 20-point underdogs?
No.
Not unless the season has gone really poorly.
Yeah, I mean, if you lose, we got a lot of swing games here. You lose the Brawl, you lose to Kansas, you lose to Utah, then who knows? But yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know the exact mileage here. It would either be this or at Arizona
Or
State on
is
what
it?
would be
Yeah.
the furthest game, because that is later on in the season. But yeah, this you knew you were going to play them eventually. They're coming off a great year. This is a much better BYU team than West Virginia beat a couple years ago. Shouldn't be easy at all. It would have kind of been cool, Cody, especially with that being on Friday and knowing that fan base. I kind of wish that was later in the month, just for the simple fact you can get Halloween atmosphere. Like that would be cool.
Do
I don't know,
Mormons do
October
Halloween?
3rd. Well, maybe they don't, but in the crowd, I don't know. Like people that live there are not all of that religion, but maybe most BYU fans are Mormon. Maybe they don't do
Yeah.
Halloween. Yeah, that's true. But
Yeah.
maybe they didn't want it on Friday night for
Yeah.
Halloween because they don't do it. Maybe that was part of it too. But that kind of would have been cool down there to see. Maybe some
Yeah.
sacrilegious outfits on. Get some West Virginia fans to bring that flavor into October. Will they celebrate early? Maybe they'll have some Halloween signs and will annoy them. And it'll also be interesting to see if West Virginia, this is just a total random aside, if West Virginia, because new coaching staff, but a lot of people in the program are still there, if they do anything, and I don't mean disrespectfully, but respectfully for BYU, because if you remember, BYU carried the West Virginia state flag through the middle of the field in Morgantown a couple years ago, and a lot of us didn't know what was going on. I even asked Montoro in the press box, like, what's going on? And then we later learned that they got approval and wanted to do that as a sign of respect. So will that in any way volley back with West Virginia
Yeah.
going to
B-
BYU? That'll be interesting.
BYU coach Kalani Sitake, he's one of the best guys in all of college football.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
every time you hear him, like he maybe more so than anybody really appreciates what college football is and what it means to communities. I remember, I don't know if you remember, Mike, before the game, when they came here, he talked about he was so excited to hear them play Country Roads,
Yeah. I
not knowing
remember
that
that.
not knowing that he would have to lose for that to happen.
He heard it. Yeah.
But like,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean that's yeah, it's great to bring that up. That was such a classy thing. I mean, he's one of my favorite coaches in the country. And I think it would be cool to reciprocate that. I don't know if you want to fly the Utah flag or something, but
I don't
think
know
it would
what
be
you
really
would
nice
do
to do
because it's not Utah. They're not the state
that.
school.
Yeah,
They're more private religious institution, BYU. So I don't know, flying the state flag of Utah, I don't know if that would be the same, because maybe Utah would even argue that's more for them. But nonetheless, I don't know what you could do. I don't think you're going to fly any flag, for Mormons, but who knows? But yeah, he is a really, really nice guy. Him and Neil Brown actually are close. So I think if Neil
Yeah.
Brown was still there would be something back, but I don't know now. I don't know if Rich Rod's even aware of what went on. But yeah, he's a really, really good guy. He's a coach that you want to root for, for sure. It's hard not to root for him. It's harder to root against somebody like him. Then you have a bye. Any quick thoughts on the middle of the season bye? This is a middle of the season bye. This is kind of a perfect spot to me, especially because you'll know at this point whether or not they're flirting with the national ranking if they get some of these games and they win the Brawl, and then they win at least, I would say, 2 of those 3 conference games. Maybe you lose to BYU, but if you beat Kansas, if you beat Utah, or even if you only win 1 of those, but at least you win the Brawl, you kind of know where the season's going. But if you lose the Brawl, you lose to Kansas, you lose to Utah, you lose to BYU, I mean, you already know there's going to be a crap season here, even though you have half the season left to go. So this is a bye to whether the fan base is going to bring the pitchforks and the perception and the parade of Rich Rod's going to totally flip, or whether it could be that special year, even though we did see, certainly from Pitt's last season, that you don't know how it's going to end just by here. You can go 7-0 in the games in a row, but I do like the bye there versus a couple weeks earlier, like some teams are getting, or could be earlier.
Yeah, I think that's the perfect spot, especially because you got the big travel the week before, and since the game's on Friday, you kind of get an extra day. I'm sure that'll be a travel day, but you kind of get an extra day. That'd also be a perfect spot because those first 3 conference games, they're not easy.
Yeah.
So no matter how those three shake out, you get a week to reevaluate, and then as we'll talk about here, the next three are your easier conference games.
Yeah.
So I think it's if you could hand pick a bye week, a lot of people would pick that week to offset the long travel to BYU and to kind of then lead into the easier part of the schedule, whether you have a good record and you just stack some more wins, or maybe it hasn't been that good of a year and you need a week to regroup a little bit.
Right.
It's just it's a really good placement. West Virginia's really lucky, I guess, fortunate to have it there versus, like you said, like after 3 or 4 games, who really needs a bye, unless you got a bunch of guys banged up or. So it is it's a decent schedule overall. It's a pretty good schedule lined up for the Mountaineers.
Yeah, we've seen a week 5 bye before. That feels like a little early. Like you get one game into Big 12 play and then you're taking a bye like that.
Yeah.
That then you want to, especially if you win it, you want to keep going. You don't at that point.
Yeah.
You don't want to buy. So I do think this is a perfect spot for buy. We will get to later if that second buy is a perfect spot, because I think that is where maybe there's some controversy that it's almost a nothing buy at that point unless you're really vying for a playoff. But yes, and we'll see how the fans react to this, Cody, as you bring up, and we're going to get into it now. The beginning part of the schedule, outside of the first 2 weeks, which are gimme games, is arguably the hardest part. So if you do crawl into this bye with only a couple wins and you're 1-2 in conference play, it'll look bad. There is an opportunity to regroup and stack some W's and still end up with a 7-win season. That is possible based on how the schedule unfolds, if it goes the way we think, because of course the team that we think is quote unquote easy could end up being really good. No one thought Arizona State would win the Big 12 if they were talking in February of a year ago. But just figuring all of that, this should be the harder part that they are ending now at this week 7 bye. And if you do end up with the Brawl win and win at Kansas and win one of those games against either Utah or BYU, and then you have a bye, you're going to not be able to mess that up, which means you're going into another week where you're probably still ranked if you get ranked there, which gives you another ranked week into the poll. And that's where you can start soaking yourself up. And if you then stack these wins, then this is where people can talk about Big 12 title and playoff. The schedule would line up if you win the earlier part of the schedule. I went there a couple years ago. I hope to go there again. I got some friends there. It's a cool road trip to have in the conference now. Week 8, WVU at UCF. They've been beating up on UCF so far since the Knights have been in the Big 12. It's not nearly the situation they've been dealing with in the Big 12 versus what they had when they were a group of 5 and they didn't have to play too many quality programs each year. They get a lot on the schedule now. They haven't been good. They now have a new coaching transition as well, much like Rich Rod. Their best years are, what they're trying to dream of happening again, because now they have Scott Frost back there. And it's kind of the same thing. The glory of Rich Rod from the past trying to rejuvenate itself, and the glory of Frost from the past trying to rejuvenate itself for UCF. That game is on the road, but their home field is nothing to really worry about. I mean, it's Florida. It's not like it's the Swamp. They have the bounce house, but it's not nearly like going to BYU. I am going to say West Virginia. I'm going to say West Virginia maybe is a slight favorite there. I'm very tempted to go swing. It depends. It's hard to gauge on what UCF's going to be this year, honestly, because even though they're loving their return of their coach, I don't see them making as many roster moves. I mean, you could say what you want about West Virginia and who they're bringing in. The quantity is at least, different than what UCF's been doing. Some people are really, really high on UCF, though. So you just never know, and it's very, very hard to believe you're going to beat them 3 years in a row.
Yeah. I would think West Virginia is a single-digit favorite. Maybe less than a touchdown favorite. And these are the two teams in the Big 12 you have no clue on if they're going to be good or not. So I'm just going back on history. West Virginia's, really ran through UCF both years, really with no issue. So.
Yeah, historically, it's never lost them, actually.
So just going on history, I would give it to WVU. Like you said, Scott Frost hasn't turned over the roster like Rich Rod has, and they were worse last year.
Yeah, so like you'd almost want them to turn it over. And
Yeah,
again,
so
West Virginia brought a lot of Jack State players in. I'm not saying they're turning it over and having the best recruiting class, but at least
right,
you want more turnover. I would think with UCF, I would want more
yeah.
players coming in. Yeah, I don't.
So based on history, based on just what we know this offseason, I would say West Virginia is
Yeah,
going to be a slight favorite.
yeah.
Obviously, if either team comes out and they're world beaters, that changes a lot. But it's hard to guess that here in February.
Yeah. I mean, this is impossible. No one should hold us to this, even though some people will try to. We're in February. We don't even know how the season went prior to this game.
Yeah,
Obviously, this is probably the hardest game to pick on the entire schedule. And
yeah,
to make this also clear, we're talking about whether they're going to be favored, underdog, or swing going into the game. They're obviously not going to win every game they're favored in. They're probably not going to lose every game they're an underdog in. And the swing games, obviously, because they're swing, could go either way. So West Virginia could go into the matchup at UCF, say 2.5-point favorite, because maybe they're a better team, but it is on the road, or 3.5 or whatever, and they could still lose. But we're thinking that going into it, they're going to be the favorite just off of
yeah,
what the situation we know now. And it's the same thing, maybe going back to the Brawl earlier, maybe Pitt would be a slight favorite for continuity's sake, even though they're going on the road to West Virginia. Doesn't mean the Mountaineers cannot win that game. Does not mean they
right.
can't win. That's just kind of going into the game on what we're thinking. They then host TCU. They've definitely been competitive with TCU since they've been in the Big 12, to say the very least. That's October 25th. This will be at home in West Virginia. We all remember the game where a myriad of players got injured, and really the last time Aubrey Burks was able to be a dominant player was before that. And TCU had their moment in the sun in the CFP in a 4-team playoff, which is really impressive to get into for that program. They deserved it that year. They got in without winning the Big 12. That opened up kind of the thinking the Big 12 could do it more than just one team. That kind of went away a little bit this past year. They're an impossible program really to predict as well, because they went through a rough slate last year, and then they kind of been underachieving since that playoff appearance. But they're not really being talked about at all in terms of national conversation in the offseason. So unless you're really in tune with UCF or with TCU, hard to say. Being at home, I got to go West Virginia favorite. If they're going to be favored on the road to UCF, and this is a similar thing where we don't know, I got to favor them at home against TCU, who's been a better
Yeah,
program in recent years too.
yeah, yeah. I would agree with you, Mike. TCU is so weird because in my head, I see it and I'm like, oh, they haven't been very good since they made the playoff. And then
Yeah.
you look it up and you're like, oh, they won 9 games last year, right? But they
Yeah.
like weren't in Big 12 talks. I guess they just didn't have the conference wins to be in that big mess at the top in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, not an impressive
Um,
amount of wins. They turned it on at
yeah,
the end, and yeah, they kind of underachieved from what they were, but you could argue that
yeah,
playoff year is maybe above what you should expect every season from them. But
yes.
and the year before that was yeah.
Um, so that's a weird team. I think they have a really good coach. I wouldn't be surprised if they were pretty good. But I agree. At home, against teams that we don't know, it's hard to pick against West
The home
Virginia at
team.
home.
Right.
You know, so I would just like you, I would give West Virginia a slight edge in that. Just knowing what we know today.
Yeah, and again, it would be weird if you win on the road to UCF in a game we don't know, and then you lose to TCU at home the week later.
Yeah,
That kind of would cancel that out. But we've seen weirder things. It's not impossible. And then it's not Dana Holgerson. That really would have been something, even though it's on the road at Houston again. They don't get them at home, so there would be no Dana return. But WVU at Houston on November 1st, and we know what happened in the last matchup in Houston with an attempt at a comeback, thinking Hudson Clement caught the game winner. Not the case. Garrett Green takes his helmet off. Hail Mary. They convert. They score. A game with no defense. It was a video game. You got to see Dana with the whole slouch of like, oh, I just lost to West Virginia. And then a minute later, jubilation. Didn't matter, though. They weren't a better team that overall year. He got fired nonetheless. And that, the worst loss of that season for sure. Hard to say Houston's going to be good. There's not much coming in there. They are going through a coaching transition, but not much coming in there. They dealt with a lot of injuries. in the past as well. Defensively, they just basically didn't try to recruit defense with Dana, and I don't see that changing, at least not yet. It takes a while there. They're going to need to build up again. The only weird thing about that is, and why Dana didn't have any more success after the group of 5 success early, is there should be money coming in there. It's not a poor location. There could be money there, but even at Houston, I'm going to have to say West Virginia favored. Houston should be bad again.
Yeah. It's hard to, like you said, it's hard to project Houston being good in the Big 12 this year. They're still trying to find their legs. They're just kind of not a Power 4 program just yet, even though they're in the conference. And I say that, like, I love Willie Fritz. I think he's a great coach. I think that was a great hire. It's just going to take a little. It's just going to take a little bit of time with them. That's another one. Like, that would probably even more so than UCF. I could see West Virginia go down there being favored by 10 or 13 or so.
Yeah, I would think that should be a situation where West Virginia is heavily favored, even though it's on the road. And if it was in West Virginia, they definitely would be. Even if they have a rough year, I would actually think West Virginia, that's the one game that, regardless of what happened prior in the season, I'm comfortable with saying West Virginia will be favored going into that matchup, just because even if the Mountaineers are having a bad year, so should Houston. That could be a matchup of 2 bad teams, or Houston likely still being bad. But it also turns out Cody Nespor liked a lot of the hires in the conference. You're a fan of all these coaching hires, and the coaches around, you like them as well. So a lot of opposing coaches that Cody Nespor is a fan of and supports here. Week 11, this is interesting, and I am very happy he did not take the Dallas Cowboys job, and that did not happen. And Jerry Jones decided to just keep on the insanity that's been going on there with the Cowboys for 30 years, because Deion Sanders will come to Morgantown in the middle there of November, and week 11, and it's not in Colorado, but it's in Morgantown. Colorado's been obviously a program that was on the rise with Deion. They went from 1-11 to, not able to win enough. They won early and then not enough in his first year. Last year, they became a contender. They got in a bowl game. They lost that, but they weren't really a CFP team like he said they were going to be. They do lose a lot. They lose their stars, but, he's proven he can coach up teams. They got weaknesses there still on their line, both offensive and defensive line. We don't know fully really about West Virginia yet. In Colorado, we really maybe don't know about at that point, or certainly not right now yet. They are at home. I'm going to say, though, because Vegas loves Deion, because he's a national sensation, there's a chance if West Virginia's having a really good year, that could be a national game, because you have Deion there and Rich Rod's in a national conversation, and Pat McAfee will probably push for it. So if the Mountaineers are good and they're ranked, and Deion, I could see that being a national game. I'm going to say Colorado's favored, though, even in Morgantown.
Ooh, I thought you were going the other way, Mike.
No. I think either Colorado's favored or it's a swing. I don't think Colorado's going to all of a sudden drop to a 2-win team, nor do I think they're going to be a playoff team. But I think there's going to be money there, because I'm going also mentally off of Vegas line, what I think Vegas is going to do. I think money's going to go to Deion. I'm going to go and say Colorado will be favored there, even though we don't know about these two teams. I could be convinced it's a swing game for sure, but no, it's either swing or Colorado's favored for me.
This is the first one I think we're opposite, because I think West Virginia is favoring that. It's just too much to lose. Travis Hunter, Shedeur Sanders. I don't want to say Deion's been carried by those two, but he's had them, his entire head coaching career.
Part of it's recruiting, though. He recruited Travis Hunter down to a freaking HBCU, but
but that's just a ton to lose with a coaching staff that is unique. It's unorthodox. So I think this is a good prove-it year for Deion. Like, this is the year, maybe even more so than last year. Like, having the success last year was big, but I think this year, Deion, prove all the doubters, prove you can go out and recruit and have stability in a program and actually sustain, and that you don't have to have your sons and the Heisman Trophy winner to be any good.
With that being said, quasi son, like he grew up with these guys.
But with that being said, like I said, it's hard for me to say West Virginia would be an underdog when they're at home, and against teams that have a lot of questions. So this will be the only game on the schedule. Mike, you and I are opposite because I would lean West Virginia.
It might be, and I'm tempted to give that as a swing. We'll see what I do here if we do this show again in another month or so. But I don't know. Someone tells me about Vegas. I also don't think I can, give them that many games where they're favored in a row, but this is an easier part of the schedule here. And yeah, there's a lot to prove for Deion for sure. There could be a bad Deion team. We've seen Deion have a bad year. I mean, 4 wins after one win is building up a program. So I don't think it's fully negative what year 1 was with Deion, but it's not nearly what the expectations were. And it's not like he walked in there and they're winning 8-9 games right away, even though he did have those same players in that year. It's still about the trenches, etc. So, yeah, it'll be interesting what Deion does because he didn't go to another job. He's still there. Many people thought even when he took the Colorado job that whether it's the Cowboys or whatever, that when Shador's gone and Travis Hunter's gone, he's going too. And he's either going to get a bigger blue blood Florida State job or Jerry Jones would then finally change his mind and do it. Didn't happen. He's still there. They're gone. So, yeah, Deion has to – this is where the rubber will meet the road to really see a lot about Deion, and that'll be really interesting because I don't know what do you think your odds are, Cody? I don't know if I can give an over under here, but what is the likelihood for you that we get a viral press conference out of a conversation with Deion Sanders? Because we're going to talk to him before the game. I'm going to slide in there, try to talk to him after the game. He's going to be available to the West Virginia media. People are covering the program. There's going to be attention there. Again, if West Virginia is good, I think there'd be a national game. So you're going to get a lot of buzz there. And then separately, because I think maybe I'm the answer, but who goes viral? if a reporter goes viral with Deion, is it Mike Asti or nobody, or do you have another option?
I'm sure. I'm sure Deion's going to say something about, Morgantown and the fans and what have you. Whatever happens, he's one of I always laugh. I always say anytime Narduzzi gets in front of national reporters, he goes viral. Because he can't help himself.
Yeah,
it's just Deion's even worse. Anytime Deion gets in front of reporters, period. He gets viral. So, in the week leading up, he's going to say something about Rich Rod or something. And after the game, he'll say something about fans or the town and I'm not saying he'll say something negative. I mean,
that's what I mean. I don't know.
He'll say something
there. He might say something positive, but
he'll say something in his Deion way of talking that makes headlines no matter what.
The one thing that I'd be curious if we get someone to dig up and maybe I'll try going into the game. There were rumors, and they never became reports. They were rumors that before he took the Colorado job, and West Virginia didn't fire Neil Brown then, but there are people that still believe to this day, including some credential reporters, that if West Virginia would have fired Neil Brown, they still would not have been in play for Deion Sanders because Deion Sanders did not want to go to West Virginia because he believes there's a lot of racism in the state, etc. And that they kind of were disqualified from him mentally because he doesn't like what goes on in the state of West Virginia. And there are others that, think that maybe they would have just gave everything to Deion, which I don't know where they would have got that money from financially before all the money we've now seen recently. So there are some things they should have done that, and they should just gave up under the sun for Deion then, and he missed the boat on Deion. But there were rumblings that he wouldn't have went to West Virginia regardless because he just does not like the state of West Virginia. I'd love to know going into that game what's true and what's not. And I definitely think if we're going to be talking to Deion, I think it's going to be a fair question. You were looking for a Power 4 job. Colorado was a floundering program for decades. West Virginia was a historic program that was trying to boot itself. If that job was open 2 years ago, would you have looked at West Virginia? Just ask it that way. And if he says, oh, yeah, but the job wasn't open, I do remember the Rich Rod days, Tavon Austin, even after that. And, maybe I could have resurrected West Virginia like I did Colorado. There's history there too, etc. Pat McAfee would have helped us out financially. Or he could say, no, I didn't think that was a program meant for me in a way, answering it in that way where you're kind of knowing, okay, he just didn't want to be there. To say that there's no racism in Colorado, where he is, by the way, is not true. In Boulder, certainly there's some there. But that was a rumor that was out there, and it was never really reported. I would love to know whether Deion in his mind disqualified the Mountaineers because of the supposed racism in West Virginia, or that was just a bunch of BS. So
Yeah.
maybe we'll find out. But I definitely
Yeah,
would love to ask him, and maybe he won't like the question and we'll go viral. But
people talked for 2 years that WVU should hire. Like every game Neil Brown lost, it was
that was brought up.
So somebody was bringing up Deion, or I kind of forgot about that. But yeah, you're right. People did talk about that a lot. Just
yeah, and it was never really a serious thing that I think anyone
there was
worried about.
There was never
no one even
connection.
did the work to legitimize because they knew Neil Brown really wasn't going to get fired then at that point, and there was no connect. But as you're saying, there's no connection. There was no connection with him in Colorado.
That's true.
You can make an argument. I mean, what was the connection there? That was just a Power 4 job that made no sense for him, but was trying to resurrect itself and was willing to put money in and give him the keys to the Cadillac. I don't, West Virginia doesn't have the money that they gave Deion at the time, but it would have bbeen very similar. I mean, it would have been very similar trying to resurrect one versus resurrecting the other. It was, people thought he made when Deion, if Deion was ever going to go to the Power 4 level when he was at Jackson State, people were talking about Florida State and they didn't hire him. Even he was in rumors for USF because that's Florida and he could recruit there, or UCF, he could recruit there in Florida. Colorado, I don't know if Colorado made any more or less sense than West Virginia for him. And if you remember way back, this is before your time following the program, he was very involved in getting Noah Devine to West Virginia. Very involved in getting Noah Devine to West Virginia. So he's been aware of the program, certainly been tapped into it, and has kind of helped it even back in the past. So I do wonder if those rumors were true. I'm tempted to believe even if they were, he would say no and would just try to say, I could have considered it, but they didn't have the job open. But we'll see if Deion's feeling like dropping a hot take or not. But someone will ask him, and if no one wants to, I will. Then at Arizona State, this should be the furthest game of the year, November 15th. This is the reigning conference champ, but Cody, I think it's fair to say that we still really don't even know about them. They could go from winning the conference to having a 7-win year. I mean, historically, they're not nearly a dominant program. They would not have been anyone's pick to go ahead and win a conference title this soon into being in the Big 12, but they did do it. Hard to know what they're going to do. I don't imagine a major drop-off just off of their staff, but I don't think they're going to be a Vegas pick to go ahead and win the Big 12 again. And that is home, though, for them. So figuring they don't drop off too much, I guess West Virginia, for me, would probably be an underdog. But I also could maybe convince for swing. But I would say underdog unless Arizona State really drops off, depending on what type of season the Mountaineers are having. They got to be underdog on the road.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely it being on the road. Arizona State they're gonna be an interesting team because they lose Cam Scattaboo, who's obviously great. But quarterback's back. I think for the most part that team stuck together.
Right.
You're gonna make fun of me. I really like Kenny Dillingham as a coach. I thought I was dead wrong. I thought they were gonna be the worst team in the league last year, and obviously they clearly weren't.
Yeah, most of us. I mean, did you vote for them as that? Did you do the Big 12 preseason?
Yeah, I did. I did them dead last.
Yeah, I think I had them dead last as well. Yeah, I mean that. Yeah, right.
So they proved me wrong, and I'm not going to sit here and I'll give them the benefit of the doubt this year that they'll be good again because they showed it. So I think
now that we've had in the curse of Cody Nespor will live on.
So I do. This in the BYU game. Distance wise, the two longest road trips. Also, like opponent wise, they're going to be the two toughest road trips. I think.
That's you're arguing the two best teams you're playing, at least from the prior year, are both on the road, are both long road trips. And even if you're a better team, a long road, I mean, they won at Arizona last year, but a long road trip is usually a problem. Certainly, it's been so.
Yeah, and I don't know. I just kind of realized this just now, but I don't know if intentionally they get the bye week again after the long road trip.
Well, that's why I alluded to earlier when I said about the second bye was controversial because it's the end of the season basically. But
after both the two long road trips on the schedule, BYU and Arizona State, they get byes. I wonder if that was intentional.
Well, what's funny, Cody, and what's funny when people talk about now. Obviously, the Big 12 can't help anything where West Virginia's located, and Cincinnati is an East Coast team now. So is UCF, and I do think they should play Cincinnati every year as their kind of conference rival, but that's not happening. They didn't get locked into it. You could maybe even try to put something together with UCF, although that would be more annoying because that fan base arguably is the most annoying in the entire country. Yeah, by far. But at least one of them for sure. At least outside of maybe the top dogs. But you do have the best games on the road, but that I would imagine maybe people think the Big 12 doesn't like West Virginia or something. I would think that I'm going to give the benefit of the doubt without 100% knowing that was done in some way intentional. I'm not saying that Ren Baker even requested it. Maybe he did, but if you're not going to give them these regional games within the conference, I'm sure whatever year they have to travel further than anybody else, the next week they get a bye. That makes sense. That does make sense to do. And then obviously next season they're not going to have this. They're not going to have those two teams being road games, but that makes sense. So that's and I will say before I ask this, that's probably, I would imagine, why this second bye is where people think is a kind of a stupid bye, because at this point your year is basically over, whether it's good or bad. You're going into the last game of the season. If it's bad, you can't fix it. If it's good, then you're still likely kind of knowing where you are going into that last game of the season. So you'd rather probably have a bye a week before or even a week before that if you want to have that second bye. The ideal situation is probably to have the first bye week 6 or week 7 and have the second bye maybe more of a week 12, week 11 type of thing. But I do wonder if the bye is here because the conference said we could give it to him the week earlier, but we want to give it to him after the long road trip.
Yeah.
So maybe then it would make sense and it wouldn't be all these fans upset about the second bye. It might have been intentional to actually help him out.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's even if it was a coincidence,
yeah, it does.
Nice. You said it earlier. I think this is a nothing bye week, because there's the only scenario where this is good for West Virginia is if the last game is going to have Big 12 implications.
Right. That's the only way. If it's rest for a play-in game for the conference title game or something. Right.
Yeah. Let's say that they've clinched a bowl, but they're not in contention for the title game. Yeah. All we're going to do that week is it's just going to be a nothing week. And then if they've got to play for a bowl game, that's going to be the whole narrative for 2 weeks. And if they've already got 7 losses, the narrative that whole week is going to be that the year wasn't good and who cares about this last game. And so it's tough, It's just a tough spot with one game left to find a lot of positives in that game, unless that last game has implications either for the Big 12 championship or to make a bowl game. And even if the scenario is you go into that bye and you have 5 wins,
the fans are going to be mad about that. I mean,
fans, us in the media, all we're going to be talking about all week is they have to win this game. They got to make the bowl game. So it's just not. It just kind of sucks.
Yeah, it's an extra week of pressure either way.
Exactly.
Because as much as you want to prepare, even if it is a game where you could maybe go into that last game, and if you win, you're in the Big 12 title game. It's another week to have to think about all of that. You could argue it's another situation that could almost trap you on being off before you get to that last game. I will say it is better now. Last year didn't end up mattering really, but because the writing was kind of on the wall and they made a bowl game, but they weren't going to do more than that. They end up getting destroyed by Texas Tech in Lubbock at the end of the year, and then Neil Brown got fired. If this was a bye and then you had to go to Lubbock, that would be doomsday. That would be awful. But the fact that it's Texas Tech coming home, so you're in West Virginia. So, you have a bye and then you stay home. So really after you have the travel to Arizona State, you don't leave Morgantown. I mean, who knows what they're going to do in the bye, but all intents and purposes, you don't have to go anywhere until the bowl game for a while or whatever, CFP or a Big 12 title game if somehow you're there. So that can be nice in a way. You'd like it to be 1 week earlier, but maybe this was done to give them kind of a break after having their long road trips. So all the fans mad. Maybe the conference was trying to do you a favor, and they didn't realize the angst of West Virginia fans who are trying to figure something out to be mad about.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, they're probably. I wonder if Brent Yormark's scrolling or having his intern scroll and being like, "Man, we what is going on? We literally did this on purpose to help them out. Why are they mad? Like, do you?"
Yeah.
But that I saw the reaction of the second buy, and I think that's kind of the best way to put it. It's just nothing. It's a nothing
Yeah.
buy. The only way it is something is if you are using it to prepare for a game against Texas Tech on November 29th, being a play-in of sorts for a Big 12 title game appearance. And it's very likely, Cody, based on this last year, that going into week 12, week 13, week 14, that there are 3 or 4 teams. I mean, West Virginia was mathematically in the Big 12 conference race until that, final week of the season. They were in it for a while, even though everyone else was done with Neil Brown and the season wasn't going well. So it's very likely you're going to have 3 to 4 teams mathematically in it, maybe even more, maybe at least a couple, 2 or 3 teams that really have a chance. We'll see if there's another team besides the conference champ that even has a playoff opportunity. So
that's another scenario that would be goofy. They could be alive in the title race going into the bye, and then depending on what happens, they could get eliminated.
That's another thing that maybe is negative about that buy. That's very, very true. Very, very
that'd
true.
Be goofy. that would be a
without playing, depending on the head-to-head, based on how the tiebreakers work, that definitely could happen, 100%. And the only negative too about that point, we're getting ahead of ourselves. But if they're having a real special year and it's a Kirk Cignetti situation and they're going to go ahead and win 10 games and they're a CFP contender, whether they win the Big 12 or not, because Kirk Cignetti and Indiana got in without winning the Big 10. So say that's an example here in the Big 12. It's a different conference. I get it. But say they're a legit national contender and they're getting ranks and 10 wins and all of that. This is the point of the season where you don't really want to be off for rankings because then the CFP is going to give you a playoff ranking at this point, and they're going to say West Virginia has 10 wins. Are they 12 or are they 14? Or maybe they have 8 or 9 wins. Or where do they fall? Oh, they didn't play. They didn't do anything good. They're off. So nope, they're out. Even if you're worrying about them being ranked 6th versus 8th or 9th, or getting into seeding, and if you care about the AP as well, all that could be affected by you not playing. So not playing, you can't lose. So maybe that's a positive in a way. It could also be a positive. You can't lose. You can't get upset in an upset weekend for a lot of teams. But you also can't win. And the committee at that point in the year is looking for teams to impress them, especially if you're not a conference champion. So unless you're going to go ahead and win the Big 12, that could be rough to have that by. But I wonder if the conference did not do it on purpose because it is after long road trips. I'm tempted to believe they kind of did. And I'll try to find out about that for sure. But Texas Tech could be a good team. They were a contender and better than people thought last year. They usually are perennially anywhere from 7 to 9 wins, usually more on the 7 side. They're always a contender, but never fully great, kind of what they were last year. That could be swing if it maybe was in Texas Tech. I would definitely say they were an underdog just for being there in Lubbock. I'm going to give them being the favorite at home. At worst, it's a swing game because they're coming off a bye, and maybe Texas Tech could be good, but Texas Tech's kind of hard to gauge as well. Last year, I did not think they were going to be as good as they were, and they ended up surprising people too.
Yeah, I would favor them too. They've had a kind of like a all-in type of offseason where they're trying to be, the Big 12 champion.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's
and
it's weird because they didn't have the roster where you're like they're right there. Like they were pretty good last year, but they've really. And credit to them for going for it. I mean, I'm sure they've spent a lot of money.
They're putting money in. I was going to say that there's definitely a lot of money coming in the past year plus, 100%. They're right up there in the money coming in.
But they went out. Taj Brooks graduated. He was a phenomenal running back for them. They go out. They get Quentin Joyner from USC. Like they went out and got like Power 4 starters out of the portal. Yes. I would.
And their facilities are ridiculous, even though it's living in Lubbock, Texas. They're ridiculous.
If I was doing the Big 12 like preseason rankings today, they would be way up there with Arizona State and Kansas State, and I mean they might be my 3. I mean they've had a really good offseason on paper, and they're trying to play off the momentum they've been building, and like I said, they're just going for it, and it very well could just pay off for them, and they have an awesome year.
And you figure that if they're going to take the gradual step from 2024 to 2025, then they could be the Arizona State. That would be the gradual step.
Yeah.
I mean, if they're really going to take that step. It is in Morgantown, though, and that is a major difference. I mean, if it was in Lubbock,
It is.
they're
Yeah.
20-point dog, even if West Virginia's having
It
a good
is.
year.
Yep.
Just the road trip's bad. So it's possible if West Virginia is a good team, maybe they would be favored on Vegas, even if Texas Tech is also a good team. If West Virginia is a bad team, then they definitely will be an underdog, even though they're at home, because you're figuring Texas Tech, even if Texas Tech is not the Arizona State and does not win the conference, they're never really a 2-win team. Like they're just always that competitive team that's maybe never great. Could this finally be the year where they are great? We will see. It's a really hard game to pick as well. Maybe that arguably is the third toughest game on the schedule, but that is at home. So that is at home. You could even argue maybe it's the toughest game if you think Arizona State and BYU maybe will drop off. So that is at least at home, and they do have 2 weeks to prepare for it. And without looking at Texas Tech's schedule, I'm assuming they don't have a bye as well the week earlier. So that's a major difference, maybe to allow the Mountaineers to scheme for them for 2 weeks where they're preparing for one opponent and then West Virginia. But that's the type of game that I almost think Rich Rodriguez would probably rather have earlier in the conference schedule, especially if it's Jalen Henderson being the quarterback, because then maybe you could surprise them a little bit. That's a team that's going to try to go fast. They're going to try to do high tempo stuff. That's going to be an offensive shootout with Rich Rod's offense versus them. That could be a lot of points both ways. That could be a really fun game to watch. But by that point, they're going to have a lot of film on the Mountaineers. A lot of film on the Mountaineers, good or bad. So you can't catch them off guard at all by then. And that can be a really quick game. I don't think Neil Brown's style of offense, even though he came from Texas Tech and, that type of thing at one point in his career, and Mike Leach and all that, can go fast enough. Certainly Garrett Green couldn't. We'll see if Rich Rod can. That's his goal. We don't know. We haven't even got to spring ball. Can they go fast enough? That's going to be a high tempo game for sure. So we went through it. We're not going to do records and full projections and all that right now. We went through it just favorite, underdog, and swing. It seems like just guessing that we both probably have them, flirting more with a 7-win season, not being bad, not being great. We'll see about year 2. Kind of seems like, based on where we were in the projections, that kind of where they would fall. But we will definitely see what happens. And again, I'm going to throw out the date if you're watching this after February 6th. So we're very, very early on this, going through the whole schedule here with favored, underdog, or swing, and giving the outlook. And a lot can change. They could freaking, lose half the roster after spring ball because they're sick of hard edge. Who knows? There's a whole other portal coming up. And a lot of these teams, even the opponents, are tough to gauge as well. Make sure to hit the notification bell here on YouTube whenever a video pops, a press conference, or any of these shows. Also find us everywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, TuneIn, Google Play, etc., and find all of our coverage at WV Sports Now.